But it's all of this has a cause-effect relationship, whereas Russia is reacting to the proactive violence carried out by NATO and their Ukrainian proxies. The territorial acquisition that took place wasn't because Russia initiated action to do this. It was because Russia was compelled to do something in response to the irresponsible behaviors of the collective West and their Ukrainian proxies. And today, if Dmitry Medvedev's words are borne out, Ukraine will lose more territories, not because Russia wanted to take them. Vladimir Putin just put a peace treaty on the table that would have prevented this from happening. But it was Ukraine that opted out. It was Ukraine that agreed to be used as a proxy force of NATO to invade Russia. And now Ukraine's going to pay the price.
Welcome back to our continuous coverage of the battlefield developments in Kursk, where the tides of war are shifting at a pace unseen in recent months. Mr. Inspector Scott Ritter has described the rapid collapse of Ukrainian defenses as an inevitable consequence of Russia's growing momentum. The cities that once stood as bastions of Ukrainian defense are now crumbling under the intense pressure of Russian assaults. Today, we delve deep into the details of how Russian forces are systematically collapsing these eastern cities and what this means for the future of the conflict. Over the past few days, the scale and scope of these operations have widened significantly. Russian forces have advanced steadily, achieving multiple strategic victories. With each town that falls, we see a growing momentum that threatens to reshape the battle lines dramatically. The implications for Ukrainian defense are profound. Can they hold out, or is a larger collapse inevitable? Now that we've set the stage, let's zero in on the Zaporizhzhia region, where UAV warfare has escalated to unprecedented levels. In the Zaporizhzhia region, both Russian and Ukrainian forces have ramped up their use of UAVs, resulting in a near constant barrage of drone strikes across the region. Inspector Scott Ritter has pointed out that the increased use of UAVs signifies a shift in modern warfare, where drone technology plays a critical role in both reconnaissance and tactical strikes. For the past several days, Ukraine has focused its UAV attacks on Russian military installations, though with varying degrees of success. Ukrainian forces claim to have struck at a Russian military airbase, destroying several aircraft. However, as has become all too common in this conflict, verifiable evidence remains elusive. On the Russian side, their UAV strategy has been less concentrated, with strikes spread across central and southern Ukraine. This decentralized approach appears designed to stretch Ukrainian air defenses thin, forcing them to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. Russian UAVs have been observed over multiple cities, creating chaos and undermining Ukraine's ability to organize a coherent defense in the region. Despite the ferocity of these attacks, there has been no sign from either side that a major offensive is imminent. Both appear locked in a prolonged war of attrition, each waiting for the other to falter. But the question remains, how long can these skirmishes continue before one side attempts a decisive strike? As the drone wars continue to rage, let's shift our focus westward to Lvivsky, where Russian forces have made a critical breakthrough. Russian forces have scored a significant victory in Lvivsky, capturing the town and immediately moving to solidify their hold on the surrounding areas. This is not merely a tactical win, but a strategic foothold that allows Russian troops to stage further operations deeper into Ukrainian-held territory. Over the past 48 hours, Russian engineering units have been fortifying defensive positions around Lvivsky, indicating that this area will serve as a base for future operations. What's critical to note here is the speed with which the Russians have moved to consolidate their gains. The capture of Lvivsky was followed by the rapid deployment of reinforcements and supplies to ensure that Ukrainian forces cannot retake the town. Satellite imagery has revealed that Russian forces are constructing makeshift fortifications along the town's perimeter, turning it into a defensive stronghold that will be difficult for Ukrainian forces to breach. While there is no immediate sign of Ukrainian counteroffensive preparations, the fall of Lvivsky represents a potential gateway for Russian forces to launch further incursions into western Ukraine. The entire dynamic of the region is shifting, and Ukraine's ability to respond is being tested. With Lvivsky firmly in Russian control, the battle for Konstantinovka has entered a new and more dangerous phase. The battle for Konstantinovka has been one of the most brutal engagements in recent weeks, and it shows no signs of slowing down. Russian forces are now 3 weeks into their siege, and the intensity of the fighting has reached a fever pitch. Ukrainian forces, led by the 79th Brigade, have mounted fierce resistance, But even they were shocked to discover Russian flags planted on key positions along Route 00532, an essential artery for Ukrainian supply lines. For Ukrainian commanders, the appearance of Russian forces so close to their defensive positions came as an unsettling surprise. Despite their best efforts, the relentless Russian offensive has pushed closer to the heart of Konstantinovka, threatening to collapse the city's defenses. The recent reports indicate that Russian troops have made significant inroads on the left flank of Route 00532, possibly setting the stage for a wider breakthrough in the days ahead. If Konstantinovka falls, it could mark a turning point in the Eastern Front. Russian forces would have a clear path to advance deeper into Ukrainian territory, further destabilizing the region. The stakes here are monumental, and the outcome of this battle could very well determine the future course of the conflict. As Konstantinovka teeters on the brink, the nearby town of Kharkiv is now under Russian assault, and the situation is escalating rapidly. Kharkiv has become the latest flashpoint in this rapidly escalating conflict. Russian forces have reportedly launched a surprise assault, crossing the river and advancing towards the town's southern outskirts. Inspector Scott Ritter has commented on the importance of controlling strategic locations like Kharkiv, as it offers Russian forces a critical pathway to cut off Ukrainian supply routes and encircle remaining defenders. Kharkiv's strategic value lies in its proximity to Highway E50, a critical supply route for both sides. If the Russians succeed in capturing Kharkiv, it would enable them to control this highway, cutting off vital Ukrainian supply lines and creating a logistical nightmare for the defenders. Recent reports suggest that Russian forces are not only targeting Kharkiv, but are also advancing on several smaller towns along the highway. This multi-pronged assault has left Ukrainian forces scrambling to reinforce their positions, but with Russian troops gaining momentum, it's uncertain whether these efforts will be enough. What makes this situation even more dire for Ukraine is the fact that Russian forces have already captured towns like Mezov and Skuchny, steadily moving their front lines closer to Kharkiv. If the pattern holds, Kharkiv could fall within days, and the road to Pokrovsk will be wide open for Russian forces to exploit. As Kharkiv faces imminent danger, Kalinov stands as the next significant challenge on the Russian path to Pokrovsk. Kalinov has now become the last major defensive bastion for Ukrainian forces before reaching the highway that leads directly to Pokrovsk. For days, Russian troops have been advancing steadily towards Kalinov, threatening to overrun the town and pave the way for a larger offensive on Pokrovsk itself. The terrain in this area poses significant challenges for both sides. Ukrainian forces have dug in along key defensive lines, but the open fields and sparse tree cover make them vulnerable to Russian artillery and airstrikes. Russian forces have already begun probing attacks, testing the strength of Ukrainian defenses while preparing for a full-scale assault. If Kalinov falls, Russian forces will be in a prime position to control the highway and launch attacks deeper into the heart of Ukrainian-held territory. The importance of this battle cannot be overstated. It could mark the beginning of a much larger Russian advance that could reshape the entire Eastern Front. With Kalinov under siege, the situation in Sailov is growing increasingly tense as Russian forces continue their relentless assault. The battle for Sailov has escalated dramatically in the past 24 hours. Russian forces have launched a series of coordinated attacks on key positions around the town, but as of now, it remains unclear how deeply they've penetrated Ukrainian defenses. What we do know is that the fighting has reached a new level of intensity, with Russian forces attempting to capture the high ground around the town, an area critical for controlling the surrounding region. Sailov sits at a strategic crossroads, and its capture would allow Russian forces to launch further attacks on nearby cities, including the vital stronghold of Novorohdivka. Ukrainian forces are determined to hold the line here, but the sheer scale of the Russian offensive suggests that the battle for Sailov is far from over. This is not merely a battle for territory, it is a battle for control over the broader strategic landscape of the region. If Russian forces can secure Sailov, they will have a clear path to advance on multiple fronts, further destabilizing Ukraine's defensive posture. As the battle for Sailov intensifies, Novorohdivka remains a key focal point of urban warfare, where Russian forces are making steady progress. In Novorohdivka, the battle has shifted into a grueling urban warfare phase, with Russian forces methodically working their way through fortified Ukrainian positions. The town's high-rise buildings have become defensive fortresses, with Ukrainian snipers and artillery teams entrenched on the upper floors. Russian forces, however, are not deterred. They have been launching sustained assaults from the railways and residential areas, steadily chipping away at Ukrainian defenses. One of the most challenging aspects of this battle is the layout of Novorodivka itself. The town's buildings are tightly clustered, creating a complex urban battlefield where every block becomes a fortress. Russian forces have adopted a strategy of encircling key buildings, using heavy artillery and close quarters combat to dislodge Ukrainian forces. Despite these challenges, Russian troops are making progress, though at a slower pace than in other parts of the front. This urban battle is not only significant for Novorodivka, but for the broader conflict as well. If Russian forces can secure this town, they will have a strong foothold to launch further attacks on Ukrainian-held territories to the west. The stakes are incredibly high, and both sides are pouring significant resources into this fight. While Novorodivka remains contested, nearby Hrdivka faces a dire situation as Russian forces close in from multiple directions. The situation in Hrdivka has become increasingly dire as Russian forces continue to encircle the town from three directions. With Ukrainian forces stretched thin, the risk of a complete encirclement is growing by the hour. Inspector Scott Ritter has noted that encirclement tactics are a hallmark of Russian strategy in this conflict, designed to weaken Ukraine's ability to regroup and mount effective counterattacks. The capture of Hrdivka would not only be a symbolic victory for Russian forces, but would also provide a critical launch point for further advances into the region. Russian forces have been executing a pincer movement around Hrdivka, steadily tightening the noose around the town. Recent reports suggest that Ukrainian forces are preparing for a last-ditch defense, but their chances of success are dwindling as Russian troops continue to gain ground. The fall of Hrdivka seems increasingly inevitable, and with it, Ukraine will lose another vital stronghold in the east. As Hrdivka faces encirclement, the nearby city of Pokrovsk is bracing for what could be a decisive Russian offensive. Pokrovsk now stands as one of the last major cities in the path of the Russian advance. Ukrainian authorities have ordered mandatory evacuations, signaling that they expect a major Russian offensive to begin at any moment. Inspector Scott Ritter has previously warned that the loss of key cities like Pokrovsk could significantly weaken Ukraine's ability to sustain its defenses in the east. This is no ordinary evacuation. This is a prelude to a massive confrontation that could determine the fate of the Eastern Front. Russian forces have been steadily advancing towards Pokrovsk from multiple directions, and with the fall of Kalinov and Novorodivka, they now have a direct path to the city. Ukrainian forces are preparing for a prolonged siege, but the question remains, can they hold out against the full weight of the Russian military machine? The stakes here could not be higher. Pokrovsk is a key logistical hub for Ukrainian forces, and if it falls, it could mark the beginning of a broader collapse of Ukrainian defenses in the east. The battle for Pokrovsk will likely be one of the most decisive engagements of the entire conflict. As we conclude today's coverage, it's clear that the situation in eastern Ukraine is becoming increasingly precarious. Inspector Scott Ritter's analysis highlights the possibility that Russia's methodical advances will continue to erode Ukrainian defenses, ultimately leading to the collapse of key strongholds like Pokrovsk. With every new battle, Russian forces continue to make gains, pushing the Ukrainian defenders to their limits. The fall of key cities like Novorodivka and Pokrovsk could signal a turning point in the conflict, one that may shape the future of the region for years to come.